Hi everyone, this is the week of the midterm. I cancelled the quiz this week in order to give you a little bit more time to study and to revise and to take the midterm. Probably the midterm and the final are probably the most stressful parts of the course. That is sort of by design, right? I have to come up with some way to sort of persuade you guys to really take a long, hard look at this, at the reading that we're doing. Which is really what I want from you in terms of the class, right? If you've gone through the class and you've read and understood the concepts in here, hopefully these videos help with the understanding. But if you've read it and you understand it fine, then I have no reservations at all in giving you an A for this class and sort of saying, yep, this person has quite a good grounding now in international relations. So. That's sort of the way that I've done that. The way that I've tried to ensure that for everybody is through these sort of midterm and final exams. I wish you all the best of luck with them. Give me a couple of weeks to grade them. It'll take me a long time because they're essays and there's a lot of you, and I have other classes too. But I want to get back to you as much as possible. Now listen. It's highly likely that I won't give you all the feedback that you would like if you, well, I don't know that that's highly likely actually. So some of you for sure, right, you won't get as much feedback on the essay as you would like, but it's probably not a ton of you. And so what I want to say is, I'll give some feedback, but if you want any more feedback on that essay in order to help you with the final, please do contact me and I will give you more. Sometimes I find though that that not everybody benefits from that in the same way. Okay, so as I said, best of luck with that. It's due on Saturday, I believe. Now I want to check. I'm hyper vigilant about that sort of thing, because if I say one thing and February the 15th, right, which is in 2 days' time. So yeah, Saturday, the end of Saturday, that midterm exam is due. If you're struggling understanding the readings, do have a look at some of the videos at the bottom of the modules page, right? Lecture videos from a prior iteration of this course, which may be helpful, but should not be relied on for dates, assessment information, that sort of thing. Have a look at those. Those will be helpful. At least the first 3 will be helpful, probably, and then these ones that I do for you guys in this class every week. All right. I want to then continue with this video by talking about the question that received the most, the clarification question that received the most upvotes from Module 8. And it was the one by Desiree. And I feel right now, having just read over those 2 pieces again from Module 8, like in a bit of a better position to answer this question than I may have been in my office hours. Okay, so the question, I'm just waiting for it to pop up, but it's the one from Desiree. It has the most, I think, 50 upvotes, which is 53, which is quite impressive, right? So certainly a popular question, and it goes like this. I was generally confused, that's always bad. I was generally confused by this reading, but it gets better, because the biographical context made it difficult to understand what some of the greater points were that relate to feminism and IR as a whole. Great. Both the Tickner pieces were quite autobiographical. Well, one of them was an interview with her, and the other one was her writing about how she came into the field. And I think that's a really interesting and important observation. About Ann Tickner, but also think about it in these terms, right? Who's put this reading together, right? Who's put this book together? What's the purpose of this book? Right? And the idea is, right, that, or my idea about why it's so biographical, right, is that those people who put this book together maybe see some sort of a link between personality and gender in international relations, right, where feminist IR scholars might want to, and Ann Tickner says this, want to be making points about international relations as a whole. That's what they think that they're doing. That's what they want to be taken as doing. But mainstream international relations, right, which feminist IR is outside of the mainstream, right? So mainstream and Antigone, that's where she's coming from. She talks about being marginalized and coming out this from. She talks about her time at Holy Cross, how they allowed me to do the research that I wanted to do, as long as it was good quality, rather than have to do the research that the mainstream international relations scholars think is the right kinds of topics. So if we talk to Antigone, right, she might feel, although I'm sure she's humble and also she's excited to be getting her story out there, and to be in the book, perhaps, which when she started, there wouldn't have been a feminist section in a book like this, and there sort of isn't a feminist section, right? That's part of 2 other sections, but there wouldn't have even been that when she started. But the point is, being marginalized, and international relations mainstream sort of looking over at feminism and saying, yeah, feminism exists, let's include this, let's be inclusive in this reader. But then saying, yeah, well, what's feminism about? Well, feminism is about women, right? Oh, I tell you who's a woman. Antigone's a woman. Let's put Antigone in. Let's hear about Antigone and about her work and how she came to her work. Now, that's fine as far as it goes, but it does result in it feeling a little bit different, maybe, from some of the other work that's in there. There's other feminist work that they could have chosen to put in there, but they've certainly it feels right to me to focus on Antigone. She starts feminism in international relations, but to make it sort of biographical or autobiographical, that does seem a little bit different. And it might be to do with the fact that international relations mainstream doesn't always know what to do with feminism. Okay, and so I'm going to have a little go at explaining, maybe sort of relating feminism to international relations as a whole, just sort of by referring to the book, by referring to what I've read again, renewed my my familiarity with these 2 readings that you did. So I'd say, a good beginning, and it's one that maybe I critique just then, right? But a good beginning, a fair beginning, is to say, okay, feminism, and this is only a beginning, right? But feminism is about women. Okay, so women in international politics. How does this affect IR as a whole? How do women affect IR as a whole? Right, and if we think about, okay, well, what does that mean? We can ask ourselves, what is IR? IR is the study of relations between nations, between nations and states. It's between it's conflict, it's war, it's it's economics, it's trade, it's diplomacy, right? It's those sorts of things. And so if we look at those subjects, war, conflict, diplomacy, trade, we can say, okay, how does that affect women, and how do women affect that, right? That's one way to sort of look at feminist international relations. Does war affect women differently from men, right? Does this sort of trade affect women more than men? And Antigone talks about some feminist work that's looked into sort of prostitution, forced prostitution to the U.S. Army in Asia. But that's one role, one way that war affects women usually differently than men. So that's one sort of objective study for feminist international relations. And the argument in favor of that sort of feminist international relations is, look, international relations, it's been dominated by men. They're looking only at the effects that these things have on men, and women have been silenced. And so, there's the social justice aspect of that, but there's also just a completeness argument, right? If we're really going to study the world as it is, and Antigone talks about in the real world a lot of times, but she says it's a different real world because it's a real world. Feminist IR studying a real world. It's a different real world from mainstream international relations because the real world basically includes women. The real world that the international relations mainstream is studying excludes women. Like, women don't exist. It's not complete because, of course, half the population of the world are women. So if you exclude them from what war means and from what trade means and what diplomacy means, then you're missing a lot of the picture there, right? So let's put women back in. That's one aspect and one sort of way that feminist IR sort of interacts with international relations as a whole. So that's a good start. The next the next thing to say is probably very closely related, and I'll just mention, right, that as well that the war affects women and trade affects women and all of those things. What about do women affect war? Is war fought differently when women are involved, either when women are in the military or when women are in the the leadership of a nation state, right? Does that look different? So that's the other half of that first explanation. The second explanation is this, and it's a little bit more sort of theoretical, a little bit more maybe sociological, a little bit more gendery. But it's this idea, and it starts where Antigone talks about the activity that she does with her students, where she asks them to sort of, she has the two columns, masculine and feminine, on the board. And she says, okay, now tell me some masculine traits, right? And people say, oh, I don't know, what do they say? I just read it there, but they'll say things like, strength, power, aggression, maybe, rationality, those sorts of things. Okay, now let's write some feminine traits on the board, and they'll write indecisiveness or weakness, emotion, as opposed to rationality. Okay, and then Antigone says, okay, so those of us who are in the room, and she says they're mostly women in her classes, right? So those of us in the room, which one of these two columns do you associate with? Right? And she says, even though they're mostly women, they will associate themselves with the masculine traits. And this says, Antigone says something about international relations and the types of skills and all the traits, right? The types of personality traits that people feel like they need in order to operate in that world, right? These women that she's teaching are ambitious, right? They want to work probably in some sort of role in foreign policy and international relations, in diplomacy maybe, but the way they think of it, they have to have these masculine traits. So international relations has to be aggressive. It has to be about power. It has to be about rationality, right, and those sorts of things. And so the argument then from feminist IR scholars is, look, if we conduct our relations with other states in a masculine way, right, with these traits, we'll get one outcome. But we might be neglecting these feminine traits, right? These feminine traits that might seem we've been led to believe are inferior in this field, right? In international relations, feminist traits are seen as inferior, but actually maybe there's some strength there. Maybe we can bring these feminine traits, we can bring those in into our relations with other states, and maybe we'll have better outcomes than being completely masculine about things. Right, so that's another area of study, right? These are all connected, right? We talk about feminist IR theory as a whole, right? But these reasons that I'm going through are sort of part of that. And something that she wants us to consider strongly as well, Antigone, is that, look, we talk about masculine and feminine traits, but that doesn't mean that women are feminine and men are masculine, right? And she says, look, these sort of masculine traits, power and strength and rationality, and those are things that all people might struggle to live up to. Right? Men as well, right? It's not just that women have feminine traits and men have masculine traits. Men sometimes don't have masculine traits. And they want to have them, and they struggle to attain them, right? And women perhaps do too, struggle to attain these masculine traits. I think of always when I think of this, I think of Margaret Thatcher, right? The Iron Lady, who projects the strength, intransigence, don't mess with me sort of attitude. What about Chancellor Merkel? Can these? And it's not that makes them less of a woman, right? But it makes them less feminine, right? Makes them less associated with these feminine traits that Antigone is identifying with her students. Okay. And that leads us to all sorts of really interesting questions in international relations, about ones that I've mentioned, like about whether feminist traits have a role and whether they can help us. Feminine traits, about what does it do when diplomats and state leaders and soldiers try to live up to those masculine traits, even men. What happens when they, how does that affect international relations when they do that? What about when women do it? And then conversely, what about when they, what about if anybody adopts any feminine traits? How does that turn out? And then we get eventually, like through that, we kind of get to this idea of feminizing enemies, right? So she makes an argument in there about how in the United States, the way we talk about Middle Eastern countries or terrorists in the Middle East, more likely, we think of them in sort of feminine terms. We give them feminine, irrationality. Oh, they're irrational. They're blowing themselves up. It's all emotion, and we give them sort of feminine traits. And she says, the interesting thing is we don't do that to the Soviets, right? We treat them as, well, they're rational. We can sit down and talk to them, and we can make sure we don't blow each other up in a rational way, in a way that we can't with the terrorists. They're irrational, and they're like women, or they're like feminine. They have feminine traits. And so, yes, to do how that comes about, why that is. How do we know when somebody has masculine traits and feminine traits? That's international relations from a feminist perspective. And to sum up, it is more difficult to put them at the heart of international relations, to put the feminists at the heart, right? International relations as a discipline kind of wants to keep them at an arm's length, right? Wants to say, oh yeah, that's good. You're doing that over there, but that's not really what international relations is about, right? And so if you agree with them, which I'm not sure that you necessarily do, right? I think you're just genuinely asking the question, but and it's fine if you do agree with them, right? A lot of people do. That's a fine position to take, right? But if you're, but so some of you might want to agree and to say, yes, feminism, I'm not sure what it really tells me about international politics, international relations as a whole. I'm not sure what it tells me. Maybe it doesn't really tell me anything. Or you can say, yep, there's a point here, right? That we're missing the role of women, or we're missing the role of femininity, and maybe we need to go and look and find it out there, and to sort of, international politics is not complete without understanding how it impacts women and how women impact it. And how gender plays a role in war and diplomacy and all those other things that we look at. So I think that about does my answer for that. Those are the things you should sort of look for in the reading, look for backing for in the reading. There will be questions about this on the final. There will be questions that will ask you to, I know we cancelled the quiz, and so there won't be a quiz about these things, which will make it a little bit more difficult for you, which hopefully this video will help with. But yeah, this will be on the final. There'll be questions that will ask you about feminist IR. I think it is something, personally, I think I'm always in favor of hearing new things, a variety of things. I think every part of international relations, every international relations scholar has something interesting to at least consider. We don't have to sort of pin our flag to any of them in particular, but we can always listen, and we can all, and I think, like I said, we're always enriched by hearing different perspectives. And so this is another perspective. So I think it's a good one to hear. And I will leave it there. Thank you.